Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from near and far, and welcome back for this week's DICE Data Center Deep Dive session. Before we get started, I would like to comment that while neither BizNow nor I claim to have the answers, it is clear that change is needed in many facets of our society. In light of recent events, our hope is for liberty, peace, equality, and justice for all of the African American community and all people of color. To those who have been harmed, either physically, emotionally, or financially, we are praying for you. BizNow rejects racism and all forms of discrimination. The scenes unfolding in cities throughout America are painful. BizNow is listening, and we encourage the entire commercial real estate industry to take notice and do more to make this industry and America more diverse and equitable. From all of us at BizNow, I want to say that we are determined to continue to push the commercial real estate industry forward, help you do more business, and bring you cutting-edge news and opportunities to learn and connect during this tumultuous time. Now for today's discussion, we'll delve into a very important topic for the entire global workforce development strategies through the lens of diversity and inclusion, STEM education, and veterans. I'd like to give a big shout out and thank you to all of our today's speakers, and to salute Mission Critical for their partnership with our efforts. Please also note the following housekeeping details for today's webinar. First, to all of our attendees, if you are not presenting today, you are both on mute and without video, so no need to be dressed up for the occasion. Next, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, stay calm and simply log out and then back in again. Additionally, throughout the webinar, we'll be sending out polls, giving you the chance to share your opinions and help drive the conversation forward. We're sending out a sample poll right now, so you can get a feel for how it works. Please answer this question thoughtfully, since we'll use these answers to shape how we continue to develop the BizNow platform. And finally, don't worry about taking notes. This webinar will be recorded and sent to you after we conclude, so relax, enjoy the conversation. Today's session will feature a wealth of industry knowledge. Our speakers include, in alphabetical order, Heather Dooley, Director of Business Operations for Learning and Tools from Google Data Centers, Melvin Greer, Chief Data Scientist from Intel Corporation, Nicole Henley, Operations Manager from Google Data Centers, Dean Nelson, Founder and Chairman of Infrastructure Masons, Nancy Novak, Chief Innovation Officer from Compass Data Centers, and will be moderated by co-founder and Chairman of Salute Mission Critical, Lee Kirby. Now let's get started. Take it away, Lee. Lee, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this discussion. If you know Salute Mission Critical, you know that we turn military veterans and transform them into world-class data center technicians. What a lot of people don't know is that the diversity of our workforce has been recognized, and that's what brought us together with Infrastructure Masons. And I also run the Veterans Program with Infrastructure Masons and work hand in hand with the other resource group, like the Women's Group and the Latinx groups and others. So I'm excited to have this group here today to discuss this important topic. It's 2020. You would think we would have made some progress by now, and we'll see what progress we've made and what we still need to do and what we can do. With that, I'll turn it over to Heather for her introduction.
Thanks, Lee. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. My name is Heather Dooley, and I am the Global Director of Business Operations, Learning, and Tools for Google's data centers. I'm very excited about this conversation today. It's a pleasure to be with my peers across the industry. And I think it's not only a timely discussion, but it's something that is critically important. We are facing a workforce challenge in the terms of pipeline across this industry. We have people who are retiring, we have a lack of diversity in our industry, and we have a lack of awareness around the opportunities in our industry. And so I've been focused internally and externally on building awareness, working with diversity and inclusion programs internally and externally, and with many of the partners who we see across the screen today. And so I just want to, again, thank BizNow, thank Lee, and really encourage a robust conversation around how we can change the future of this industry together.
Melvin?
Sure, I'm Melvin Greer. I'm Chief Data Scientist at Intel. and I am certainly focused on the changing nature of events around workforce and talent. And certainly we are very, very focused at Intel on opening up some would say uncomfortable discussions around privilege. And so I'm happy to join this panel so that we can delve deeper into it and perhaps come up with some recommendations that might move the ball forward.
Thanks. Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Henley, and I'm a part of the Google Data Center family. I've been at Google for approximately 2 years. Been in technology for almost a couple of decades. Looking forward to the discussion on this panel. Based upon my experience, I worked with very diverse teams in very diverse industries. And so looking forward to seeing and hearing what the panelists have to say today. Diversity across the board is something that every organization should focus on because of the elements that diversity brings to the creativity and the unity of the organizations. So looking forward to partaking in that. Thank you, BizNow, for having us, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks. Dean?
Yeah, hi, Dean Nelson. I'm the founder and chairman of Infrastructure Masons. So for the folks that might not be aware of the group itself, we're a professional association, and we are uniting the builders of the digital age. And folks on the screen are contributing huge amounts into what we're doing as far as a community itself. And we have 4 strategic priorities that we go after. The first one is awareness. So people don't know exactly what our industry is about and what we do. And that leads to the next one, which is education. We don't really have the programs that are lined up that allow us to be able to attract people into the industry. And that includes all different types of people. So we've got a diversity problem and a diversity inclusion focus as well. We don't have the diversity we need within the industry. For example, we have less than 10% females in the industry. And we have even less than that in other underrepresented groups. So how do we change that mixture? And the last one we're doing is around sustainability, because we all have a very large responsibility in the decisions that we make globally. And we've got some people who are very passionate about doing the right thing when it comes down to every click improves the future. So I'm excited about this panel too, because we can have some straight, open conversations that, as Mel was saying, that are uncomfortable. That's where we actually get the insights. And I think it's important for us to have those, especially as leaders in the positions we have and the authority we have. What can we do to actually make differences in changing the way things are doing right now?
Thanks. Nancy?
Hi, everybody. I am Nancy Novak, and I am Chief Innovation Officer for Compass Data Centers. I've been in the building industry for over 3 decades. And I've spent a good deal of my time very passionate about trying to become a more inclusive industry. And frankly, I'm disappointed because I do put a lot into it. I feel like I have some good insight, but I do know that we need to move that needle in a more meaningful way. So I'm super excited about having the conversation with all of these wonderful leaders in our industry. And I look forward to coming up with some solutions.
Thanks, Nancy. And that's a great segue into my first question. It's 2020. We've been talking about a personnel shortage in the industry for at least 2 decades that I remember, talking about diversity, veterans, underrepresented groups. Are we making progress? And I'd like to open it up first to Melvin. Let's have that uncomfortable conversation. Can we see at the industry level or at the large corporation level progress over the last 20 years?
Well, I think there are pockets of progress for sure. We see that there's a real trend on hiring diversity and inclusion chief officers in corporations. I think there's a need to continue that good work, because if we continue to drive workforce recruiting and talent from the exact same places we've always done, then we won't get the kind of mix of individuals that we are looking for to make sure that we can continue to drive innovation. Our ability to have access to and identify more underrepresented minorities, women, girls, African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics. These people, they provide a rich and dynamic opportunity for organizations and corporations to find meaningful talent instead of trying to just go to the exact same spots we always go. I know at Intel, we are spending a significant amount of time trying to figure out what is driving our recruitment and talent acquisition strategy. It means our ability to continue to grow and innovate. So we're trying to find many different ways to do that. We are faced with some pretty daunting kinds of obstacles, though. You know, in almost every corporation, there are elements of bias and privilege that are impediments to our ability to find a reasonably sound talent. Sometimes we have preconceived ideas about the only places talent can be found. And so these challenges face not only Intel, but all folks, whether they're in the tech sector or not. And so we're spending a significant amount of time in listening sessions, internally and externally, trying to make sure we understand what people's real thoughts are and what are driving some of the decisions that are being made. And then soon we'll start rolling out a new plan that will likely take us into the 2030 timeframe.
Excellent. And Nancy, you're in the construction side of our industry. Our industry has 10% representation of half the population. So construction has to be at least at 10%, or is it less?
It's right around 9% for women in all areas of construction, only 3% in the trades, which is also fairly dismal. I mean, there's a variety of things we could say are reasons for that. As Nicole pointed out earlier in her introduction, there's a huge business case for becoming diverse, from all the diversity of thought, diversity of culture background, and you can Google that. Anyone can Google that. The business case is pretty unrefutable. So then we get into the how do we get more diverse? I tend to focus more on the advancement of trying to push people up, especially women, because I know a lot about that in our industry. Because the advancement, I think, will kind of solve some of the problems from the pipeline standpoint. I've seen the pipeline kind of get fuller, and then I see the drop off, when we get to that mid-management level. And honestly, I'm a storyteller, so I have a quick story that I hope will resonate with a few people. So I get asked a lot to speak at different companies, and especially in the construction industry. And I have great guys who will be like, Nancy, this is fantastic. I need you to come speak to our women. You have a lot of information that you can offer. We really need to encourage them to stay in the industry and grow in the industry. And so the point about staying in the industry is sort of this story about if they could just adjust their lives to adapt to our industry, then they could, they would maybe stay. And along this one in particular, a president of a large global firm said, I just so much appreciate what you do. And I know that I could never do my job without the support of my wife at home taking care of things. And I said to him, your heart is in the right place. But what you just said to a young female in your industry is that she cannot do your job without your setup at home, which is absolutely not true. So I try to send the message of, the industry needs to change, and we need to accept the fact that these jobs can be done and done very well in different manners. You don't have to have the same approach to how to manage a project. I had my third child building a launch pad. I was, running a launch pad job, and that was 20 years ago, and it was unheard of, at the time in the industry. And then what people will do is they'll say, well, that's just it's an anomaly. You're very different. And I'm telling them, no, I'm not different. My credentials are no better than many other people's credentials. But we have to be able to adapt to each other's lives. Whether you're female or diverse or any other special needs, because people have this talent and they can successfully build and even more successfully build using their own skill set, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dean, you're
the heart of what you're talking about, Nancy, is not only after you go through all of the hard work of pipeline development and bringing new people into the industry, but how do you retain them? Right. Mm-hmm. And the importance around retention has to do with building a culture that is accepting of the innovation that we truly want in this industry. Right. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's a devastating situation when we go through all of the hard work to build awareness and pipeline development and bring people into the industry just to see them leave.
Yep.
Because we're at the heart of it, we're trying to build that innovation, right? And the diverse of thinking, diverse backgrounds, diverse perspectives, so that we can become better and better. So it's really about retention as well, not only pipeline development.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I look at this as like this is a simple business problem. Not to break it down into simple, but I like basics. And that is that we're missing kind of half the population as a talent source. So when you just think about, right, gender itself, the fact that for the actions, what you just talked about, Nancy, the things that are happening are precluding or stopping people from coming into the industry. And that's specifically because they can't see themselves doing that job. And the companies have to adjust. And the whole point of inclusion is that you are considerate of all the other people in there and you are appreciative of those opinions because you know they add value. And that debate and the experience is the thing that makes the differentiation when it comes down to how you execute in business. And so I think as leaders, if you're not conscious of that one, you're missing out on this big opportunity of all this talent, a whole pipeline, right? And gender is one, and then all other, right, underrepresented groups. That's what we're missing. And you know, the uncomfortable conversations is that the majority of the industry in the US right now look like me, that Caucasian males over 50.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality of it. But that's not acceptable. Now, and then you go back to the privilege conversation. You know, so why is it that actually that is a representation of what's going on in our industry? We want to change it, but in the end of it, if I look at myself and be critical, it is that I have worked hard to get what I'm doing. Yes. But have I had more opportunities because of my gender or the color of my skin than others? And I think that privilege is actually there. Now, do I like it? No. Is that the fact? I think it's a reality. And especially the events that have been going on lately have really exposed it. And that, I think, is the uncomfortable conversation that we should be having. And it should include everybody, because in the end of it, we have to make a change at the top and at the bottom, right?
Dean,
it's got to be there.
I think one of the issues we have is that we say we want diversity and we want to embrace it, but do we truly want to accept it? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have found is that we have painted corporate America into one type. And so when we try to bring in other people that don't fit that type, we say, well, they're not a culture fit. Well, are we looking for diversity? And what is your culture fit, right? So there was one organization I worked at, and it was very, polished, militant, the whole 9 yards, but we wouldn't hire people with tattoos. And that's not a part of a diversity, but we lump it under, hey, it's not a culture fit. So I think we have to get to the point where we really, truly embrace and accept what diversity is, even if it's not a part of our quote unquote culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really, I think this is particularly important when we talk about recruitment outside of the undergraduate and postdoc and higher education areas, and we get down to K through 12 and we start trying to mature the new workforce, right, and help them develop the skills that are required. One of the reasons that I formed a nonprofit organization, the Greer Institute, is because we needed to focus not on just the gap in pay between genders or the small number of executives that are African American or Black, but because in the K through 12 areas, we need to provide new kinds of skills and address this issue around privilege and bias earlier in the conversation, and not just to little Black kids, because they all, it's no question, all Black kids get talked to by their parents about how the real world works. But I think what we're seeing now, and I think what is a little bit different than in the past, is that we have white families that are advocates that are starting to take notice of the real issues that are involved and provide some context to the rationale for why we have this inequity that's going on. Greer Institute is focused on helping many different types of folks understand how to develop science and engineering careers and identify mentors and advocates earlier in the process as opposed to later in the process.
I think that's a great point, Mel, and I hope you guys don't mind if I share another quick story. And because it deals with exactly what Nicole and Mel just talked about when it comes to culture, right? The culture fit. So a few years back, I had a Black female engineer on one of my projects, a large, about $100 million project. And she came in at kind of like that entry level field engineer, office engineer, and she was doing her job. And every time there'd be a meeting with the team, she would kind of get, really under the gun by the manager. He was like demanding answers, and she was very quiet and very subdued and respectful. Her peers called me at home and said, we're going to lose her. We're going to lose her because she's not going to put up with this anymore. But here's the thing. She knows her stuff. We work with her all day. She has the answer to everything. She's really, really good. And, but she's not willing to, speak up and push back. And because she was taught, she has professional parents, and she was taught to be respectful, not rock the boat. It was kind of a cultural thing that we weren't accustomed to, because we can be quite aggressive in our business, right? So what I did was I went to the job and I took the superintendents out and the manager, and I said, look, I'm going to put her in the field, and you guys are going to open your arms and embrace her. All of the foremen, the superintendents, everyone's going to let her just shadow them for 2 weeks, make her super comfortable, and then she's going to, really understand, how we work in the field, so that she gets really comfortable pushing back a little bit. Of course, they were like, this is a terrible idea, Nancy. And I said, well, here's the thing. You are going to be held responsible for her success. If she doesn't succeed, I'm coming after you. Well, guess what? She's a manager now in that company. She's running work, and she's doing great. And when I went back to the job site after she spent about a month in the field, her superintendent said, she's awesome. I'm going to give her more scope. She's the first one here, the last one gone. I went to take her to lunch that day, and she said, Nancy, it should be illegal to have this much fun every day on my job. So, yeah, and my whole point of telling that story is that, I really feel like, as, people who, are already so-called in the culture, we need to start looking for those reasons why, people may not be contributing in the way that they actually can contribute, because not everyone's like us, right?
True. I think it's a form of allyship and sponsorship. And I think that people who are in power and the folks that are leaders have a responsibility to create a culture of allyship and mentorship. I've been thinking a lot lately about the pass down of and transfer of knowledge, especially as our workforce also continues to age in our industry. 33% of folks in our industry are reporting that they will be retiring by 2025. So we lose 30% in 4 years. And so that advocacy, the allyship, mentorship, and I think like a buddy program for that transfer of knowledge, making sure that our senior technicians and our operations folks and people who have this rich history of being successful in this industry have a responsibility to pass that knowledge through and make sure that we are creating an equitable environment so people can be successful.
Absolutely.
With a system, changing a system is not an easy thing. There's measures and metrics that we have to have in place. I don't think that we're seeing those metrics change that much over the last few years. So there's got to be some changes that we can do both at the local level and at the industry level. What would you suggest to someone that's running a data center, what they can do, practical steps they can do to join in from the groundswell and push this up while others are pushing from the top?
Well, I think first is that sense of responsibility, that we are actually better together. I think that also our statistics aren't actually measuring the results that we want. I don't think we're pushing ourselves hard enough. The Google diversity report came out recently, and we had nominal increases in Black and Latinx hires, and women. At Google at the top level, about 25% remain in tech roles. And we every year we get a goal to hire more. I actually think those goals aren't aggressive enough. I think we need to hold ourselves to higher standards and really put programs in place to move that needle, to Nancy's point earlier. You know, we should be obtaining gender parity, and everyone should have a goal to do so at the
Yeah, I
minimum.
think, no, I agree with you, Heather. I think there's a degree of intentionality that's required. I know there's always this idea of understanding numbers and metrics, but I think there's 3 areas that we would encourage folks to focus on. Most people don't leave or join a company because of the big company. They're looking at the first line manager. So understanding the ability of that first line manager to communicate well, to provide good instruction, to understand privilege and bias is a really good thing to have. I think being able to identify advocates for underrepresented populations, especially folks in the Black community, is going to be critical, because without advocates, even if you have a mentor, an advocate can provide a wealth of information and can represent you in forums where you can't be. And third, I think an investment in identifying new ponds to fish in. You know, if we only go to those universities where they have PhDs that have been getting $100 million worth of government funding, have 1,000 citations in Google Scholar, and who have been principal investigators in industry funding, that's going to limit the number of people that we're going to be able to get access to. It's probably a good idea to go to historical Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions and start making some really good relationships there, finance research there, get to have days in academia where they bring their students, and then you get a chance to go to the universities and provide them capstone projects that are real world. These are the kinds of real activities that can have a significant impact.
I love also the internship programs. You know, we've been making a large focus and investment in the data center internship opportunities over the last 2 years. One of the recommendations I have for internships, though, is to make sure that you actually have available headcount and that you can actually hire. So it's not only the experience itself that folks get through an internship, but that there's a space for them in your company after they're done.
Yeah, and so at iMasons, we're kind of focusing on both ends of the spectrum here, and purposely. So first off, we know we don't have a pipeline that's filled with talent, and we also know that it's lower in diversity. So we're putting scholarship programs together, right? We've given, I think, over 30 scholarships, raised $300,000. Like, there's real money, and our problem is that we don't have enough applicants coming in. We have money in the bank and we can't give it away. And then Heather just talked about 30% of our workforce is going away. This is a crisis coming. And I think that everybody has to realize that from a business perspective, that it's going to be very difficult to keep up with the amount of growth going on. And this pandemic, I mean, it's just exacerbated it. You know, Microsoft added 100 megawatts of capacity in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, right? That's the biggest number I ever heard, right, across their portfolio. And that's because Teams is growing and all the other things. So if you just look at it from a business perspective, if you are blind to the opportunity of what is out there, you're going to get exactly what you're looking for. And so, you know, just like Melvin was saying, we got to change the approach to broaden the net. Yeah. And at the same time, you look at it from the bottom side, we need to bring in this new talent. We need to give them the opportunities. And that goes right to what Heather was saying. Great. So we give them scholarships. Then is there a tie to the intern programs? And is there really a job they could get? Because, you know, you want to keep these people, right, that are coming back into the industry itself. And then on the other side, it's still the leadership side. And I forgot who was mentioning that, but, you know, we just don't have the diversity mix at the top. And that is, it's people look up and say, is there anybody that looks like me? And there's a lot that look like me, and there's not a lot that look like you. And that's not right. We have to change that mix. And that's, to me, these diversity inclusion programs and things that are in there, I think they're doing good things, but it's really clear right now they're not doing enough. Mm-hmm. And the corporations that are out there are trying to do the right thing, But I think as Heather and Nancy and everybody said, it's not aggressive enough, especially right now. So the unconscious bias and the privilege and the shrinking funnel because of just what society has is limiting our opportunity to get to this talent. So we got to step back and check ourselves. Are we the cause? And if we are, then what the hell are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
And
I love Melvin's, more ponds, go fish in more, go to historically Black colleges, look for the organizations, STEM Connector, things like this where you have, more contingent of the talent pool that's looking for work. And I do believe, Dean, what you're saying, as far as advancement, like we can get the leadership to be by diverse, it will definitely help fill our pipeline with more diversity, which will bring all of us, better results.
I agree with the.
Yes, Nicole, please.
No, I was just quick statement. I agree with the increase in the ponds to go to different areas, attracting talent. But I think we need to do a better job in the data center industry of representing ourselves, advertising ourselves. Mm-hmm. When you ask a lot of IT people, or let's just take college students about data centers, what they think a data center is not what it actually is. And they're looking more on the facility side versus the IT side. And I think one of the things we have to do is advertise ourselves better. Hey, we are in the IT industry. Yes, this is cloud. This is what we do. But you talk to a lot of younger people, and data centers it doesn't connect to them as far as what we do and how we're a part of the IT industry. So I think we have to advertise ourselves better once we go to those places like Melvin has mentioned, HBCUs and the other areas.
That awareness building is absolutely critical. And on top of that, we also have to break down some stereotypes because folks, if you think about the different types of skills that are needed in the data centers, some of those tend to be stereotypical: electricians, pipe fitters, right? And I'm talking about the rich ecosystem, not just folks that you might hire directly. This is an incredibly dynamic industry of suppliers, vendors, manufacturers, hyperscalers, small colos, right? And the whole mix. And that entire mix needs to be thinking about, how do you remove barriers? Nicole, you and I were talking about this yesterday, but one of the areas is in job descriptions and even possibly in the opportunity to bring in interns or scholarships, but removing biases in actual descriptions will actually increase your candidacy pool by 11% by just removing biases in job descriptions.
I can't agree with that more. And so Heather, I'm going to follow Nancy's lead here. I got to tell a story. It was really eye-opening for me. There was an experiment run around these resumes. And I'm sure people have heard this before, but they had the exact same resume and they submitted it through the portals the same way. And what they did is, they had John Smith and then they changed it to Jane Smith. And the responses and the unconscious bias and the other piece that came in, it was like, oh, well, they already had decided, and right, Jane was actually excluded from the majority of the actual opportunities to go to that next level, just from a resume submission. So here you've got the job descriptions that might have implicit bias baked into them and people don't even know about it. When you read it, others read it, is it already excluding people? And then the other one is your systems and filters of how you're going to get that talent. You might just be excluding them anyways for other unconscious bias. So I think it really has to be something that people are consciously thinking about, because if not, they're limiting their opportunities.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize what you said, Dean, because right now, when we have our listening sessions, it's clear that our Black employees are under significant stress. And it's almost unreasonable to consider that they're going to be able to continue to do a high-performing job with the kinds of emotional toll that is being taken on them. They're concerned about their own personal safety when they go outside. They're concerned about upward mobility, and are they being evaluated with the same criteria as the rest of the organization? Are their views and values being listened to and appreciated as much as the masses? Are we really focusing on driving higher representation of these people. So, these listening sessions have opened up a deeper understanding of how acute the problem is, especially for Black men and women that we work with. I will tell you that the stories that we're hearing inside and outside and across our ecosystem are very, very depressing. But I think the positive that's coming out of this is that we're actually having these discussions, that we're actually in better position to say, hey, you know what, we need to spend more time understanding some of these pressures, because nobody's going to come to work saying, I'm completely under stress because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to drive home safely without somebody stopping me and killing me.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly that is on the minds of people. I do want to just address one of the things I saw in the chat about organizations or schools that you can target diversity. There are 117 historical Black colleges and universities. I could pick out individual ones, but it really depends on the context. Many of these universities have PhD programs in computer science and other STEM fields. 5 of them have medical school programs if you're in health and life sciences. Many of them have engineering programs that are going to be able to provide you with the kinds of talent that's going to be sensitive to your ability to engineer and develop solutions that are, going to resonate with everyone. I think there are a couple of organizations that I do want to point to directly, though. The BDPA, which is the Black Data Processor Professionals Association, they have a very large STEM program that is really focusing in on not just K through 12, but undergraduate and postdocs. They are clearly one of the organizations that do well in maturing African American talent and women talent in STEM. And so I think these kinds of organizations are the ones that you want to try and start focusing on.
Yeah, and NSBE, I think, also is a real mature program that works directly with a variety of different universities. So the National Society of Black Engineers, they also have a student program. These types of societies or interest groups are, well positioned to partner with. And I encourage us to create those partnerships across this industry, because they've been steeped in it a lot longer than we have, and have solutions and pathways that we can learn from.
And I just want to mention that, why I think this conversation is so important, because in the past, many people thought of diversity and inclusion as some sort of philanthropic, great thing to do for society. That's really no longer the case. This is really about global competitiveness and being able to be an innovative, forward-thinking company. And in many cases, I know for Intel, we think of it as part of our survival. One of our CEOs said, the future belongs to the paranoid. And so we're always challenging ourselves to determine whether or not, we're doing the right thing. I mean, if you look at our current corporate responsibility report, you'll see some of the great things we've already done. We've closed the pay gap. We've won numerous awards for diversity and inclusion. We're spending about $1 billion with diverse-owned business owners through our Intel Capital VC. But the recent events have brought a real spotlight on some of the areas that we can do better on. And so I can tell you, without any question, that we're absolutely focused, not from a philanthropic, a societal good perspective, but because we are absolutely trying to be the best company in the global competitive marketplace that we can be. And it's this kind of thinking that leads to that kind of advance.
I can tell you, Melvin, you're definitely not alone, and I know you know that. I was a guest at the White House a few years back, and every large tech firm was present, along with all the Ivy League colleges, and every single one of them said, we will not be relevant in the future if we do not figure this out. And so part of me is like, so why haven't we figured it out? We know there's a business case. You know, how silly is it that we haven't figured this out? And I would like to leave everybody before we get into the questions session with a, you know, let's start changing the business and quit trying to change the people. Like, let's change our business to include all people and hear all voices, and, you know, take advantage of the talent that is out there instead of trying to mold everybody into this business structure, like Nicole said, that was, you know, that was developed, you know, back in the mid-century.
Absolutely spot on, Nancy. And if anything comes out of this, it's just that people need to consider there's a business problem to solve here. It is simply a pipeline of talent, and you're all going to get impacted if you don't think about how to, you know, fish in more ponds and broaden your net to get those things. And I think the other one, just again, just to be, I like to check myself at different times. And I want to share a story because it really touched me in the last month. So a senior female executive, right, Black executive in the industry, sent a note to me after I put this open letter out to our community, really about talking about privilege and why do we have what we have right now? What's the mix? And she mentioned something in there that just I can't stop thinking about. I can't unread, which was that she consciously named her children differently, named her children differently so that they would have more opportunities because they didn't sound like they had a Black name. I'm sorry, but think about that from your own perspective. As a Caucasian, have you ever had to think in that manner? And so how deep is this across there that people have to take such drastic, right, moves to give opportunity? And that goes back to that privilege part. Whereas, you know, did I ever have to think about that? No. Was I racist with the things in the middle of it? No, I don't think I was. But in the end, I got a lot of opportunities because of my gender and because of the color of my skin. And trust me, that is a really hard thing to swallow when you think about it. Now, in a leadership position, because one of our biggest problems we've called out on this panel is we don't have representation at the top. Doesn't matter if it's gender, Black, Hispanic, right? All of these things, there's a smaller percentage at the top.
Very small.
And we have to fix that as well. The pipelines and the things, we can open the nets, right? Get more ponds. But in the end of it, how do we address at the top? And that is the uncomfortable conversation because we're not leading by example.
Yeah, one of the things we learned. Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
To your point regarding the young lady that named her kids a more, I would say, appropriate professional name, whatever you want to put in there. Those are the conversations we have in the Black community with our children. When it came, you know, I grew up in that era, you know, make sure you name your children certain names because it may increase their chances of getting a job in corporate America. I actually stopped having that conversation with my kids because it's one of those things where you are who you are, you are a good person. Corporations should hire you based upon attributes and not the culture that has been created. So your attributes, your integrity, your work ethic, not what you may or may not believe or what you look like, but we're looking at good work attributes. And that's the message that I give my kids now. But in the Black community, we do have to have those serious conversations on how do you survive and how do you progress in a world that is not built or geared toward you. And I, you know, my mother, you know, she named me Nicole, of course, but my father wanted to name me something else. And she did not name me that because she knew she would have a hard time in life if I named her that. So I can definitely attest to what you're saying. It's a true conversation that's had in the Black community.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I think it addresses one of the questions around the kinds of biases that we're referring to. You know, I think in women, you know, if women are really ambitious, but they still have a strong sense of family and don't want to stay working in the office till 10 o'clock at night, you know, they can be seen as not as connected, not as committed. If they, and an example of how a single bias can work in two different ways with two different contexts. if a woman is overly aggressive, is forward, is a straight talker, sometimes that can be seen as a negative. And at the same time, if a Black male is not seen as aggressive enough or not as talkative, it can be seen as a negative when in the Black male's personality and what external forces have forced them to understand in many cases is that, hey, I don't want to be seen as the angry Black man in the organization who can't get along with people. And so these kinds of internal and external ways of looking at things can have a significant impact on the people's ability to continue to move up the career ladder or even be recruited and be valued as an employee. So they're absolutely worth taking a look at. And I really want to emphasize what I think many of the folks in the panel are saying, which is it's time to be reflective and look at what it is we actually are doing and be more intentional and cognizant of what we're doing and how it's affecting other people, both in terms of recruitment and workforce and talent acquisition, but also of retention.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And this discussion has been great, and I know that we're going to run out of time in a little bit, but I wanted to try to boil it down if I could and go around the panel. Think of me as a participant. What do you want me to take away from this? What can be my next step to really affect change, to make those metrics change, to make the representation change? This is going to be an ongoing discussion. It won't be the last of it, but what's the takeaway today? Heather, do you mind starting off?
Not at all. My ask of the industry is that we work on this together. Not any one of us singularly will be able to make the change that's necessary. And so I think that we all have to really target and focus intentionality across this industry so that we create a space for a diverse pipeline for people to be successful in their careers, to retain that talent that we work so hard to get. So my ask is really actually that we stop thinking about it as a issue that only each company has to solve, and we think about it collectively as how we solve this across this industry.
Thanks, Melvin.
So the takeaway that I'd like to leave people with is that a new day has dawned. If you think the people who work in your company are going to take your word for diversity and inclusion, or are going to wait for programs that help them progress and identify and target some of the issues they're dealing with, then you may be in for a rude awakening. Because I think what people have come to realize is that there's no more waiting. There's no more discussion time for sitting around and powwows and assigning this to some committee that's not going to do anything. I think what you're seeing, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a data center owner, operator, or a tech company, is that you have really, really, really got to pay attention to the social dynamic that's being played out that's affecting your underrepresented minority workers, because they are absolutely watching you and are looking for you to make substantive change.
Thank you. Nicole?
You know, I'm going to stick to what I say all the time. Change always starts with leadership. Across the org, people have got to look up and see that the leadership dynamic is changing before they'll believe that it'll change in their own dynamic. There's this thing called the law of the picture. People do what they see. And if they see leaders as what we currently have now, they're going to continue to replicate that down to the lower levels. And so I believe once we begin to see changes in our leadership regarding diversity, we'll begin to see it across the other areas in organizations as well. I think we need to, go back to the table, have a real conversation. What are we really looking for in our culture? Or do we need to redefine it, like what I said earlier, by attributes? Because apparently our culture is not drawing the diversity that we need. So we need to go back to the table, have real conversations. Don't beat people up with programs and presentations, make the changes at the highest level, and have the real conversations. And I think those are things that, you know, will get us to where we need to be. And the last thing is take advantage of the momentum that we currently have with the awareness that's being brought to social injustice and racial discrimination. Take that momentum, use it, have the uncomfortable conversations, and be honest and open in those conversations.
Thanks. Dean?
Yeah, I think there's two things that I want to convey. The first one is that leaders, everybody that's out there, we actually have a problem when it comes down to business. Like I was mentioning before, if 30% of the workforce is going to be graying out, retiring, and the pipeline is going to continue to dry up, you got to solve the business problem. You have to rethink how that's done. So no matter what, business problem first, figure out what you're going to do differently. Second one is personally. And this is really calling out specifically to Caucasian males over 50. Again, a high representation of what's going on in our industry right now. This is an uncomfortable conversation, and you should be having it. And you should be checking yourself for unconscious bias, microaggressions, all the little things that you may not be thinking about when you're making decisions, when you're actually communicating. And so going back and reflecting in to realize, can you even relate to the conversations we just had here? Have you ever had to make a decision about changing your name to give you an opportunity? Get that in your head, get an understanding of it, and have conversations, open ones where you're listening to it. Not positioning, not trying to come back with a response, actually listening to what Melvin was saying before. Those listening sessions, if it's a group of a certain minority together, they're going to have a different conversation than they are with somebody else in the room, because they may not feel comfortable. It doesn't matter if it's gender or race, etc. There's going to be the, how do we make it comfortable and safe for the people that are in our companies? Without that, nothing's going to change. So that will change exactly, I think, what Nicole was saying, the opportunity that allows senior leaders to come in, to be a representative, to have people that can aspire to be in those positions in the future. That's going to just attract more talent. So we got to hit it at both ends of this.
Excellent. Nancy?
All great final thoughts. And to Nicole's point, shame on us if we don't take advantage of this crisis to really move the needle in a very meaningful way. I do think that my takeaway is I want us to hold ourselves accountable. I want us to know that if we don't succeed in making us a more diverse industry, and especially at the top levels, that it's us who have failed. You know, so we want to hold ourselves accountable. To Heather's point, we have to leverage each other. We have to make sure we're collaborative and that we do this together, because it's going to take a large force in order to make things happen. But I do think we need to look internally and say, what are we doing? What are we doing that is preventing this from happening? And then remind, you know, everybody, it's a business case. It's truly a business case. It's, you know, it's the philanthropic thing doesn't usually move the needle the way it's supposed to, sadly. But there's a very strong business case, and shame on us if we don't take advantage of this and really make a difference.
That's great. And I'd like to just take a moment to thank the panel for joining us. I'm hoping this is the first of many discussions. You can see that the topic is very complex. There's looking at from the top to the bottom, we need to get better representation at the top, simultaneous to expanding our nets. Don't just think of internal, but also think of your supplier programs and which suppliers you can count on to provide diverse resources. It comes from every angle, and you as an individual practitioner, the words that resonate in my mind are from Martin Luther King is, we won't remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Now is not the time for those in the majority to be silent. Now is the time for us to advocate and to push for change. And I appreciate everybody being involved in this, and we'll turn it back over to Adam.
Thanks, Lee. Once again, another really important discussion, and I'd like to thank today's distinguished speakers and our partners, Salute Mission Critical, so very much. Regarding the efforts leading to a brighter future, this industry and the world can and needs to do better, and I can and am determined to do better job at fostering a more diverse platform. We hope you'll all join us for our next webinar this Thursday, June 18th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, as we explore the future of the hyperscale market. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.